That being said, I think people are selectively listening a little bit to what they heard. A lot has been made about, Rand Carthen said it's a deep tackle class. You could get a tackle in the second or third round that you feel comfortable with. No one's talking about how right there, Brian Callahan said, hey, there's going to be receivers in this class in the second, third, fourth round that are instant contributors for the teams that they go to. There are some other things that were said in a clip that we're about to hear from Brian Callahan about playmakers versus bolstering the offensive line. I want you to pay attention while we play this. He says some things that indicate receivers, that's my ish. That's what I want. We need to get receiving playmakers on the team. And yes, he does say those things, but there's some really important qualifiers in here that I think are being largely ignored. Let's listen to what Brian Callahan had to say.
A big one, I think, at the end of the day, the NFL is about scoring points, and having people that can score points is important. I would say that situation and our situation are probably very different, both in who those players are and where we are in our process. So, we were going into year 3, and Jamar Chase and Penei Sewell, I think, were kind of unanimously considered to be all-pro caliber players. They've both lived up to that billing, and so it's a different set of players, different set of circumstances. But I'll always lean when all things are equal. Guys that can score touchdowns tend to make more of an impact.
What's all the talk about?
Okay, so 3 things in there that I think people are largely ignoring, because everybody hears all things equal. I prefer the playmakers of the offensive line. When I was with the Bengals, we did pick Jamar over Penei, and we agree with that decision. We like that decision. Some things in there that I think are being ignored. Number one, he points out how the situation is different, right? They were in year 3 of a rebuild in Cincinnati when that happened. The Titans are in year 1 of a rebuild. It's a different portion of the timeline, and so there's an element of, can you really afford to have your dessert before you've eaten your beans and vegetables, right? You need to clean your dinner plate before you get the luxury players on top. That's I'm not saying that's the way it has to be done, but one could argue from that perspective, right? The other things that he said at the end there, he stopped mid-sentence and said, all things being equal, I prefer playmaker over offensive line. We don't know that he considers these things to be equal. That statement to me speaks more to my philosophy is, on an even playing field, I would rather take the wide receiver than the offensive line if they're the same caliber player. Not necessarily the case for the level of need the Titans have those 2 positions, and not necessarily the case, the third point that I was going to make, where he says, hey, Penei and Jamar were both that year considered to be all pro ceiling caliber players. The Bengals were picking at 5 that year? 5, yeah, so 5th overall, a little bit higher than the Titans were. That was a very, very strong class at the top of that draft class.
And arguably, because there were so many good quarterbacks in there, that was also the Tua and the Justin Herbert.
Yep.
Penei Sewell and Jamar Chase could have gone 2 or 3 if those quarterbacks weren't in that draft.
Right, you had Herbert and Tua and Burrow, of course, all 3, right?
I think Trevor.
Yes, Trevor. Is that right? No, Trevor was Zach Wilson's year. Was it Burrow? I think it was Burrow.
It might have been Burrow.
I'm pretty sure it was Burrow. I think it was Burrow.
Then it was the year after, I think.
Okay, yes, it was the point being, they took him at 5. Both of those guys were considered can't miss prospects, right? Yep. It's not necessarily a guarantee that you're going to get 2 can't miss prospects for the Titans at 7. That's where I want to take this conversation. If their point is, all things being equal, we're going to lean the wide receiver over tackle, which I believe that's what they're saying. I believe that's what they will do if it comes down to that. Where's the line? And what I mean by that is, if their tackle 1 and their wide receiver 1 are both there at 7, it sounds like on paper that in this case, you're going to take Marvin over the tackles, right? Duh. But okay, so now you got your tackle 1. It's just Joe Alt is their favorite tackle, and Malik Neighbors there, wide receiver 2 for them. I think they're going to take Neighbors. I think they keep talking about the explosiveness, the playmaker. That's what Malik Neighbors is, right? That he fits the bill 100%. This is where it becomes, I think, the most realistic and the most interesting, because I'd say it's less than a coin flip odds Malik Neighbors falls to 7. It's not impossible, but I'd say it's less likely than not. And so if you don't have Neighbors on the board, you don't have Marvin Harrison Jr. on the board. Okay, so it's wide receiver 3, and I don't know what their board looks like. I'm making hypothetical.
It could be
any order, right?
Any order.
But my point is, whoever the person is, if they're wide receiver 3 and tackle 1 are their options at 7, are they still leaning receiver? At what? Okay, and so if your receiver 3 is Rome Odunze, and you're like, okay, Rome, yep, I still take Rome over Alt. Fine, I'm not necessarily agreeing with that, but okay, let's keep taking it too long. Okay, Brian Thomas Jr. or all 3 of the top receivers are gone, and it's Brian Thomas Jr. out of Texas or Joe Alt out of Notre Dame. Surely then you're going tackle, right? Like I think so. Here's my bottom line. A lot of folks seemingly took away from this press conference that it's going to be receiver at 7. That's not what I heard. I heard if our guy is there, it's going to be receiver at 7. And that if is doing a lot of work. Does that make sense?
I think so. And pushing back, not on you, but just the opposite way around.
Sure.
Think I got the same thing from you, but it's if our guy's there, we're taking him. If he's not, we're going to play the board as it falls. And I think that's because I think the alternate reality of that also is very true, that there is a reality where as we continue this week, maybe more and more people fall into the Paris Johnson Jr. syndrome of last season, that you're just assuming Joe Alt's going to be there and then you can just continue your mock drafts after that.
And then he's gone in reality, he's gone 3 picks before then, and you're up a creek. Yeah.
But I think then that becomes that on the reverse side, that also becomes a very interesting conversation to have. If you have both receivers there and you have Olu-Fashanu, okay, how do you then, with those two top wide receivers there, what's the disconnect between Joe Alt and Olu-Fashanu on their board, right? And I think that can work the same way, which then I think they would no-brainer at 7 if Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze is there. They're taking one of those two over Olu, I think, because of what we heard today. But it's all about how they rank their board and if their guy is there.
And as to the point of how they rank their board, it all depends on what they're looking for. I found this interesting, that all of the little traitsy mentions they had today, what they're looking for in a guy, the explosiveness, the playmaking, that all screams Neighbors to me on paper, right? And that's kind of the vibe that he gives off. We're assuming Marvin Harrison Jr. is out of the equation here, right? So between Neighbors and Rome Odunze, sounds like Neighbors to me.
I think I saw Ben Solak say today that the only way that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to go under a rock, and as long as that rock doesn't hurt him when he's under it,
right,
he's still going to be number one.
Right, exactly. As long as Patrick Star doesn't get crushed by his own home, he will be all right. So if it's between Malik and Rome, it sounds to me like they are leaning towards a guy like Malik Neighbors, and yet we've not talked a ton. We're going to talk later this week about the differences between these guys, but man, Rome and Malik are very different. Malik, most of his production came from in the slot. I think like 30% of his production came from specifically slot fades, which was Jaden Daniels' just bread and butter this year. He was the slot fade king. I won't say slot fade merchant, but maybe. And so a lot of that was big slot stuff from him. With Rome Odunze, most of his production was true X outside receiver. And so it becomes a question of what are the Titans looking for? Man, we know Tim Kelly, his offense utilized DeAndre Hopkins as the wide receiver 1 in and outside. Very, very diverse scheme, but he did play a lot of inside as well as out. He's a guy that in his later years, a lot of people have theorized, hey, this guy may be better served in the slot at times, especially if you have a true boundary X option, a big fella that can go on the outside and not just be Traylon Burks. And, people are like, okay, cool, you got Traylon out there, but somebody that you're actually scared of as a defense, right? No, sorry for the Traylon slander, but we're going to talk about him in a little bit.
We'll talk about
So if they got that guy in Rome, you think that's the way it would be, but I think it's an interesting clue as to how they see D-Hop and how they see these receivers. Now maybe it's the case that they would love a big X, a big outside guy, but at the end of the day, they just think Malik is that much more talented than Rome that who cares? Just get the dude on the team. We'll figure out how they fit into the scheme later. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's just preference at that point. It's what does really explosive mean to you? Explosive.
Did it sound like Malik to you, or is that just me?
I think it definitely did.
That's what I felt like they kept talking about.
Or more explosive in the sense that deep downfield, once they get downfield with that explosiveness and getting off the line, the contested catch, I think also could be there. I think they did
right
in the way they should do it. They gave a very classic shielded answer behind explosive. So what does that pertain? A
guy that explodes.
Yeah, making plays, big playmaker. Right?
Yeah,
it could either be in yards.
What's a playmaker? An explosive guy.
Yeah,
just a circular argument.
He makes big plays, right? Like that could either be yards after the catch, or that could be in the end zone on 3rd and goal. Like different type of things that they
different strokes
continue to tell us. And I think either way you look at it, regardless of if it is a tackle or if it is the wide receiver, they're going to pick a guy who they believe can do more than just the normal player.
Right, 100%.